Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, it's Tom Woods. It's episode 2669 of The Tom Woods Show. And we got our old friend Auron MacIntyre here, who, let me just say, as he has an extra virtue today. The extra virtue is, at the very last minute, I had somebody back out, and I thought, who else could have this exact conversation with me, who won't throw me away as a friend if I ask him at the very last minute? And old Auron MacIntyre of the Auron MacIntyre Show, author of The Total State, the book I've been badgering you all to read, stepped up to the plate, and here he is. So welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So what I want to do, the thing is, it's like, how do I keep every episode of my show from being the same episode for the next 3 weeks? Because the Epstein thing has blown up, which then in turn has caused a lot of, I hate the word influencer, but so I don't know, like right-wing intellectuals, whatever you want to say, to now do kind of like a soul searching or like an accounting of the Trump 6 or so months that we've had, but looking at the ledger and trying to figure out, well, what's the overall, plus or minus of the whole thing. So I now I feel like that's all I want to talk about with everybody who comes on. But I really do want to go and look at what things are we happy happened, what things did not happen that we think should happen, and what things are just, outright catastrophes. So why don't we start where everybody is right now, which is this Epstein matter. I'm sure you've already said everything you feel like you want to say about it. But what I really want to say about it is not, I don't want to reconstruct what Pam Bondi said and then this one's, I think most people have that story in their heads. It's more, there are a couple of different stories being told on the right. And one of them is, this is going to go away. It's only our people who really care about this that much. This will dissipate and forget about it. And there are other people saying this will not go away. This has taken a huge amount of the wind out of the sails, wind that they needed for the midterms, of this movement. Which one of those, or maybe you have a third one, better describes your opinion?
Well, I think the first interesting thing to take out of this is that for all of the discussion and all the assertions, I think this kind of proves that ultimately MAGA is not a cult. And I think it does that because there have been so many people, myself included, who have ultimately said, look, this isn't what you promised. This is obviously not what we expected. There was an important promise made around these things that you really have to make a choice. Either Kash Patel and Pam Bondi and Dan Bongino were lying then or they're lying now, but they can't be both, right? Like either they didn't think this was very serious and they drummed it all up to create a conspiracy theory to get power and to whip the base up, and then they got in and they couldn't sustain it, or they truly believed this stuff. They were really crusading about it. They knew that there was a deep problem, and when they showed up, something or someone told them, no further. We can't do this. There's something about this that compromises the entire system. And even if you believed ultimately that this was a terrible thing, we have to keep this quiet because there's something larger. But those are really your only options. And I think a lot of people in the MAGA movement, there's always going to be shills, right? There's always going to be people who will just sell themselves out. Whatever Trump says, whenever he says it, for whatever reason, they're going to follow it just because, that's the plan. But I think what we're seeing here is that actually be it immigration or continual war or the Epstein files, there is a real part, and Trump is, I think, a core of the movement, but he was picking up on things that people truly believe. And the fact that he's not delivering on those things means there are people who are truly pushing back. And so I guess at this point, the question is ultimately, yes, I think that this is a bigger issue for kind of the loud online base than it is for probably the average Trump voter somewhere who showed up to a rally in the middle of, Ohio or something. But what do we think actually drives the MAGA movement? Do we think it's kind of the casual opinion of the average person at a Trump rally in Ohio? Or really is it this very online movement? And I think, I don't want to self-aggrandize here, but I think it is very much a movement that is driven by those voices. I think this is especially true when we look at what's happening inside the Trump administration. I think there are a lot of people plugged into kind of the online commentariat, that sphere, these kind of things, and they are very much in tune to how those people feel about what's happening in the Trump administration. So honestly, I don't think this is going away. If this was one event all by itself, if Trump was deporting 10 million people tomorrow, then yeah, maybe people would be less focused on this. But when we're getting, continued operations in Ukraine, continued possible operations in Iran, when we're not getting a high degree of deportations, where we're talking about carve-outs in the deportations for farm workers and hotel workers, and all of this is getting added into the Epstein stuff, I think it adds up to people who are just not seeing this administration as following through on several of its promises.
Yeah. So that's exactly the thing, is that if people felt like he hadn't, been siding with, people they despise over and over, especially in recent weeks, they'd still be angry, but there would be that little voice in their head saying, but my gosh, he's delivered on so much. But boy, he picked a really rotten time to stick it in the faces of everybody by re-emphasizing his devotion to Lindsey Graham, for heaven's sake, or Randy Fine, or whoever these other people are. So in a way, I think for some people, it would look almost crude in light of the seriousness of the Epstein matter, even to do a reckoning of the Trump administration. But I still think it needs to be done, at the very least as an academic exercise, to say what are the unambiguously good things that have come out of it. I mean, let's start there, and then we are going to go into either the things that didn't get done or the things that did get done that shouldn't have been done. So how would you, if you had to make a pitch for the Trump 6 months, let's say, what would be a few things you would put in it?
Well, the number one thing has to be the reduction in border crossings, right? You can say that Trump has not delivered to sufficient quantity when it comes to deportations, but his main promise was always closing the border. And we are looking at border crossings, as I understand it, that are so low, they're down to like numbers from the 1960s at this point, which compared to Joe Biden letting in probably 8 to 10 million immigrants during his 4 years is a pretty radical change. I mean, it's not a hard bar to clear at this point because the prior administration was actively hostile to us having a national border. But the fact that we have reduced them so drastically is a huge deal. And I don't think Trump gets enough credit for that because people are, I think, rightly focused on the fact that deportations need to ratchet up. But the fact that they have so radically reduced the number of people coming into the United States is a really big deal. I think that the deportations we have seen are good. I think that the Trump administration started with a plan of, okay, we know we're going to get court challenges. We know we're going to have a hard time finding the countries to put these people in. We know we're going to have to deal with a bit of political blowback. And if we just run out there and collect 10 million people and put them all in, camps and prepare them to get shipped out, that's not going to work because we're not going to have a place to put these people. There's not going to be the infrastructure necessary. We're going to have legal challenges. All this is going to slow down. And we'll end up in a scenario where we produce exactly the outcome that the left was trying to point to of concentration camps and all this stuff. So you need to be careful about how you roll this out. So start with smaller deportations, but start with the worst possible actors. Make the left own a bunch of wife beating, drug dealing, gang banging guys, with gang tattoos everywhere. Force them to defend these people first, and establish the right to send these people home before you start sending people who are a little more sympathetic, a little more difficult to sell to the American people. So those parts of the plan, I think, have been largely a success. I'd also say that Trump's whittling down of many critical departments like USAID and Department of Education, still, many of these things are required statutorily. Some of this stuff continues. The new budget is supposed to get rid of the Civil Rights Office that was responsible for the Community Relations Service that was responsible for basically covering up anti-white crime in the United States. So there have been, I know it's not as extensive as most libertarians would want, and as many people who embraced Elon Musk's Doge idea as thorough as they would prefer, but there have been key cuts to the progressive ecosystem that I think are very important. We've seen a challenge to birthright citizenship actually get some favorable momentum. We're still very far away from that being anything the Supreme Court has finally ruled on, but at least preliminarily, it seems like we're able to take certain steps towards the possibility of getting a correct reading of the 14th Amendment as much as one is available, because the 14th Amendment is a disaster. So we are seeing, I think, on attacking some of the progressive patronage network, scaling down some of the slush fund for leftist activities across the globe. We have seen some cuts on Department of Education that are critical. We have seen border security radically improved. And so I think these would be some of the top things I would point to when looking at the Trump administration and, trying to say, here are some concrete achievements we've seen in the first 6 months or so. Remember, we are still only 6 months in, but obviously as time goes by, that excuse lessens and lessens.
Right. It's just that it's the 6 months has been such a whirlwind that it's sometimes we have to remind ourselves that it's been only 6 months. I would say also, and I'll get a little pushback for this, but that the RFK Jr. appointment took some guts, because obviously he carries a lot of baggage and he holds a lot of unapproved opinions. I'll get pushback because some people will say he hasn't gone far enough. He's made some oddball decisions. I know people are unhappy that apparently the Moderna COVID vax was approved for children. Children obviously don't need this ridiculous thing. And I really hate to sound like, like I'm naive, but I do think this is a case, and I'm making excuses, I'm just explaining it, where I think there are things going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. I think there is wheeling and dealing. You can have this, but we have to have that. And I think some people have just settled into, that's the way the world works, and I'm not going to get everything I want, but I'll get some things that I want. And one thing that obviously RFK Jr. wants is he really wants to get to the bottom of the autism problem. And it is very obvious, he's saying that by September, we're going to have some preliminary answers as to what's causing this. It's obvious he already knows the answer. He's already reached the conclusion that he wants to reach. And if that is the answer that he's going to give to that is a 10 megaton bomb politically, that the likes of which I don't think we've ever seen in the health world or in HHS before. So that's no small thing. So I would definitely add that. And of course, I have sentimental attachment to Ross Ulbricht, and he really did get released. And I thought Trump would take more heat for that. But the way Trump solved that problem was he did so much so quickly that nobody had time to attack him for it, because he was doing so many other things. So what about things where you feel like a promise was made that it's not that he did the opposite of it, he just hasn't done it yet? Are there examples of that?
Well, sure. Obviously, we're looking at foreign conflicts and are very confused, I guess, at where we're at there. Obviously, we saw a good chunk of the right learn a very important lesson with the Ukraine war. Conservatives who had been pretty, pro foreign conflict on a regular basis suddenly recognized that no, actually, the Biden administration will lie you into a war, and they will they will find ways to try to manipulate you and get funding and push all these things and attack your loyalty. And maybe this is a lesson we should learn on the right, that ultimately calls for war, not a unalloyed good, but actually very often it's your own leaders manipulating you into something that's against your interests. And Trump seemed very on board with that. He seemed very clearly somebody who was understanding that needed to unwind ourselves from many of these current conflicts. One of the things that is very clear is, obviously we could just walk away from the Ukraine war tomorrow and it would end. Ukraine is being funded by the United States. It is a proxy war against Russia. You can lie about that all you want, but that's exactly what's going on. And so, the thing that Trump wants is a deal, right? He wants to walk away by saying he ended the war. He doesn't want to walk away by saying, yeah, we basically stopped funding one side and this collapsed the whole thing. He wants a peace deal. He wants the photo op. He wants to show that he out-negotiated Vladimir Putin. And that's really how he wants this thing to end. And so it looks like we are going to continue to send some level, and we've been talking about Patriot missile batteries over there. Now, A lot of people have stipulated, I think that's probably right, you're speculated rather, and I think it's right, that Trump ultimately wants this as a piece of leverage for a further deal. He's not looking for a long-term funding of Ukraine and actually helping them to end up, much in the way that Iran probably doesn't actually want a nuke, but they need a bargaining chip. They need a serious threat in order to get people to listen. Trump kind of has the same thing. Look, Putin, you need to figure out a way to put a bow on this, because if you don't, the weapons will continue to flow. And so I think that is probably more where he's at, rather than looking to continue that conflict. But either way, the result ends up being the same. We keep sending very expensive weapon systems that we are low on to a theoretical ally that is never going to win this war. And so I think that is something that he might eventually do. He might eventually make good on. He might get himself into a negotiating position where he can drive the type of deal he's talking about. But right now, it's simply unavailable to him. And so I think that is probably a big one for most people. Again, the deportations are another one. We see this big increase. I know this is a big gulf between maybe some of us, paleo-conservatives and some libertarians. We don't mind funding ICE as long as it's actually doing its job. So you've got a military budget now. I better see some military-style activity. Now, libertarians are probably laughing in the corner like, haha, Charlie Brown football again. You guys lined up to fund a government agency, and now it's not going to do what it said it's going to do. Big surprise, it's a government agency. But at some point, you have to move these people out of the country, and that's going to take physical bodies. Like, that's just a reality here. And so if you actually do care about restoring the United States to something approaching a real nation, you're going to have to get these done. So I think that's something that Trump might end up being able to completely do, or at least deliver a decent chunk on, if he actually utilizes the funding and the tools that have been made available to him. It's very clear that he knows, and his administration knows, that this is a central promise that can make or break them. And so if they don't at least appear to be making significant strides on this, they will receive significant pushback even from their most casual supporter. And so I think those are two areas where the promise has not been completed yet, but it's also not completely failed. He hasn't betrayed necessarily in those areas, but he has made the timeline much longer than I think many of his supporters would have appreciated. And he's taking steps that might set him up for long-term success, but if he doesn't capitalize them, it will look like a large betrayal, because it will be.
Hey, gang, let's get more money in your pocket effective immediately. If you're a business owner or run a team in a large company and you want to stop paying high prices for software, regain your digital sovereignty, and want software that's flexible, you need to use Federated Computer. Federated Computer provides all the software you need for your business or team without the high prices, no creepy data collection, and total flexibility to use your software for your business goals. What's more, a typical Federated Computer customer saves $300 per month per employee. With Federated Computer, you get email, calendar, groupware, file management, Office 365 documents, spreadsheets, presentations, video conferencing, group chat, CRM, databases, appointment management, and so much more. They don't charge by the user. Instead, you pay a single low monthly price for your business. How does $120 per month for your whole business sound? And that's for everything. Tom Woods Show listeners have been saving big using Federated Computer. A dental practice reduced its monthly software costs by $7,000 per month. A construction firm saved so much money, they were able to hire a salesperson to increase sales. Tom Woods listener companies use Federated Computer to talk privately with each other without worrying conversations are going to end up part of some AI chatbot. No need to worry about change. Federated Computer customer support is there to help you every step of the way. I still don't understand the magic these guys must employ to make it all happen. Now, only for the Tom Woods audience, if you use code WOODS at checkout, you'll save even more, 30% off your first year. They even offer a free month to check things out. How do they do it? Federated Computer is run literally by the same people who invented cloud computing. These guys know their stuff. They enjoy empowering customers with tools to find success in your business. Do yourself a favor. Take advantage of this offer now. Use code WOODS for 30% off your first year at federated.computer. That's federated.computer. Let's say a word, if we may, about a subject that's, it used to be radioactive, and now everybody's talking about it. And that, of course, is Israel, which was an issue that for a long time on the right, it seemed possible to have a friendly disagreement about it. I mean, not that friendly. Like if you weren't on board with if you were against or skeptical of the relationship between the U.S. and Israel and whether it was actually any good for the U.S., which is the only question that matters for an American citizen, you would probably have to keep that to yourself. Uh, but in the past few years, it's become possible. I think like there are people who realize, okay, well, there's some disagreement on this, but we can agree on other things. But now I think it's gotten to the point where it's going to be very hard it's increasingly hard to get along with people who have a differing opinion on this matter because they've made it into the only issue. For some people, it's become the only issue. So, and Trump has sent, I mean, let's face it, he has sent mixed signals on this. Yes. There have been times when it's looked like maybe he might make some modification of this. And then, obviously, more recently, it's almost embarrassing how fawning his allegiance to Netanyahu is. What do you think about this? Because I think, is it fair to say that, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if I look through Auron MacIntyre's Twitter feed over the past few years, probably a few years ago, this was not your number one issue. But now everybody has to talk about it one way or another. Right. Where do you come down on?
It's one of those things where, like you said, I would prefer to never talk about Israel because it's a foreign country and who cares, right? Like I am America first, and if at all possible, I would like to solve the problems in America. And to be really frank, the United States regime, as it's been constituted, for quite a while, and especially the last 4 years, is the most dangerous thing to my people and to my nation. Russia's bad, I'm sure, and Iran's bad, I'm sure. But ultimately, that has domestic concerns are the most important to me, not because like I don't want to learn geography and I'm an American and who cares, but because really the forces at home arrayed against the American people are much more dangerous than those abroad, to be really frank. However, as you say, this has creeped more and more into the conversation. And I think we are getting to a point where these conversations are going to happen no matter what. Yes, there are people screaming hysterically to try to stop them, but that really shows you how much power they've lost, right? Like Russell Kirk wrote The Conservative Mind. This guy was like a stalwart of conservative intellectualism for a very long time. And he basically got pushed to the edges of the movement because he made the joke that the American capital is in Tel Aviv one too many times, right? So this is a guy who was thoroughly established in the movement, had all the credibility in the world, and still got burned on this topic. Now, Dave Smith is sitting at TP USA events debating, Josh Hammer and getting more cheers from the crowd than Hammer is every time he's talking about Israel and kind of the issues facing this. I think there is, and this is going to be really difficult, and the people who want to push back against this are going to have to work really hard on this. Obviously, there is just like a really gross, like a coarse version of just kind of lazy anti-Semitism that sits on the internet and makes this discussion very difficult, because that's what really, very hardcore Zionists go back to every time they get pushback, because somewhere someone is like, well, the Jews control everything and they're trying to destroy everyone, and we got to get rid of them, and like that kind of language is obviously going to make this entire discussion toxic. And for a very long time, unfortunately, a lot of people who were willing to have this conversation were really only of that ilk. And so you understand, and in many ways that's useful to people who would like to ensure that these are the only kind of people that hold these concerns. But more and more, I think you look at guys like Tucker Carlson and even Charlie Kirk to some degree, and they're starting to ask, do we really need to send money to Israel? Like, they're rich. It's a powerful country. Why do they need our money? Why are we constantly deploying aircraft carriers there when I've got a foreign invasion happening on my border? Like, what's the United States military for? Whose border is it supposed to protect? And, all the arguments that you make for Ukraine work for Israel. You can make exactly the same arguments, and conservatives already agree with the Ukrainian arguments. So you can bring a lot of these same arguments. Look, I'm sure, the heads of the Palestinian resistance are probably not the best guys, in the same way Putin isn't the best guy, but is this really our fight? Do we really need to put our money into it? Is this really America first? You can make the exact same arguments. Zelensky, Netanyahu, very easy parallels as to how much these people are really interested in the well-being of my country, these kind of things. And so I think more and more there is the ability to make these arguments and make them on mainstream platforms and not immediately have this huge pushback. There are, of course, I think still the big Israeli boosters that are, there are a lot of the people who are making this their only issue, but increasingly they're just becoming shrill. They don't have any real leg to stand on. They don't have a lot of organic support. We're having serious discussions about whether dispensationalism is a legitimate theological position in evangelical Christianity. Imagine having that discussion ever. 10 years ago, this just wouldn't exist. So
that's finally happening. That conversation now. If they're going to act like this and condemn everybody as being not Christian because they're not taking their simplistic interpretation of one verse, then they asked for this and they're going to get it. And it's never going away. This conversation is going to happen, and it's going to make serious inroads because honest people will realize that the dispensationalist stuff is wrong.
Yeah, I agree, and I think this, and that's really the key, because you hear Ted Cruz, we're like, I don't know about you, I tend to think that most people, including politicians, are motivated by both ideology and money, not just one or the other. There are some people who just get completely bought out, but honestly, I think Ted Cruz takes a lot of money from AIPAC because he believes what a Sunday school teacher.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it's just money. I agree with you.
Right, and so having that conversation, having that basic, unremovable support for a secular modern government in the Middle East, having that no longer baked into the actual theology of the believing Christians in the country, that's huge. That's a big deal, and that's going to unwind a lot of this, because I think once you do that, you realize, and a lot of people demonize Israel. Oh, they do this, they do that. It sounds like a lot of stuff that pretty much every modern state does, and I think that makes them guilty in a lot of bad things, but it also makes them guilty in a way that many other nations are. So I just don't want them to be doing it with our support, on our behalf, with our us funding those things. And I think once you get rid of that biblical justification, it's very easy for the average person to look at that and say, oh wait, yeah, it is just another government. They spy on us. They don't have our best interests at heart. So let them do their thing. They're a sovereign nation. If they feel like they need to battle the Palestinians or the Iranians, let them do it, and let them do it with their money and their military, and not an ounce of blood or treasure from my country.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go back to Epstein thing, because you're saying that it won't go away, or that at the very least there are going to be a lot of people of some prominence who are going to keep bringing it up. Maybe you saw Matt Walsh is not perfect, but he's better than I thought.
Oh yeah,
and he came back from vacation a day or two ago, and and had the kind of post of like, what has gone on since I've been away? I mean, I come back and we've got all these completely new interpretations of who Epstein was, and you're a conspiracy theorist if you disagree and all that. But so in other words, there will be people like him with big audiences who keep on bringing it up. But it looks to me like Trump has really painted himself into a corner now, because what could he do now that would satisfy those people?
Yeah, it's not easy. And honestly, the question behind it all, the one that I don't think we can ever get an answer to, is what is actually tied up in this? Mutual friends of ours, Kevin Dolan, was on Twitter recently, and he said, hey, the reason, it's very simple, probably, I don't know, I don't have any information you don't have, but the reason the Trump administration isn't going to go after this is it'll literally just unravel the entire Western governmental structure. It's probably that far reaching, that the revelations are probably that damning. And for a lot of us are like, well, yeah, of course, that's kind of the point. Sure. But at the same time, you have to recognize that if you are operating a system of power and you are trying, in theory, to actually govern, then having something like that come apart literally just undoes everything you were going to do, because it's going to be the whole thing. Deportations, whatever. And I'm not justifying what he's doing. I'm just trying to provide an explanation. Yeah. Any of the rest of his agenda completely comes apart, because if you unleash a beast like that, that is 4 years, if you're very lucky, of your country basically trying not to tear itself apart, and forget any of the agenda stuff you were going to do. And I don't think that's how Trump wants to be remembered. I think he wants to be remembered as the guy who gets things done, has a nice economy, ultimately moves things in the proper direction for trade or immigration. I don't think he wants to be the guy that's unraveling this giant, horrible thing that's living under the entire government. It probably needs to happen. I support it, but I I can put myself in that position and think myself through this. I have enough theory of mind for Donald Trump and the people administration to say, why wouldn't they do this? And honestly, this makes the most sense to me.
Hey everybody, let's take a minute to thank our sponsor, Persist SEO. If you're getting buried by your competition online, then build your brand, your reputation, and your lead flow with digital marketing by Persist SEO. If you're a small local business trying to compete against large companies in the service industry, then increase your visibility with Persist SEO. What if you have low or no leads coming in on a consistent basis? Well, then website search engine and conversion optimization can help move the needle to a more prosperous business model for you. Are you tired of cold calling and networking? Use your website as a lead generation engine. What if you're not showing up for your services in the search engines? Well, get found with Persist SEO Expert Search Engine Optimization. All you have to do is call 770-580-3736 or visit them at ineedseo.help for a free website audit and consultation. That's 770-580-3736 or ineedseo.help. And I know you're not saying, so therefore this is what should be done. You're saying this is why he's thinking that way. But it really, in my mind, it goes to remind me that if you're going to displace an entrenched elite class that governs the West, there's no way, or it's highly unlikely that comes about in a way that isn't extremely messy.
Right.
You know, because if it could have, it would have happened already. We would have done it. So
all the easy off ramps are behind us.
Yeah.
That's all done. And that's really difficult because, like I said, no one wants to preside over the complete dismantling of trust in the federal government, right? Like nobody wants to, and we're talking about revolutionary caliber, truths being unleashed, and I feel strongly that's probably the case. And again, I'm a guy who the only reason most people know who I am is like because I tap a sign telling you they want to diddle kids. Like obviously this is evil, and I care a lot about this, and the people involved should all end up with the biblical solution, which involves quite a few millstones. I'm very big on millstone futures here. But ultimately, I understand, like I said, I can put myself in that position and say, if you were Donald Trump, is this how you would like to spend the 4 years before you probably shuffle off this mortal coil, right? And the answer is no, that he didn't sign up for this. Again, I don't think that's okay. I don't think that explains it in a moral sense, but I do think in a practical sense that lays out why we're probably not going to see this happening. Because like you said, it's just too much. Who can stare into that abyss and say, I am ready to unspool the world global order? Not many men, honestly.
So what's been happening on Twitter about this is there have been people like Mark Levin, Ben Shapiro, not just on Twitter, and others whose allegiances to Israel are pretty obvious. Everybody knows them. Who they've been saying, you're all crazy conspiracy theorists, and Trump has now repudiated you for your dumb conspiracies. So knock that off. We have the information about Epstein that we're ever going to have. And Shapiro's message is, look, I know Dan Bongino, and I trust him. If he tells me that there's nothing here, and he killed himself, and the rest of it is as he says, I have no reason to disbelieve that. But it's interesting that the overlap between people who say, I think the Epstein thing is all done, and people who say, I'm really happy about the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu is pretty much 100%. Now, I don't mean, what I mean is the people who are content with the Epstein thing tend to fall in that other camp. I don't mean that everybody in that other camp is content with the Epstein thing. This is basic Aristotelian syllogisms here. So I'm not saying that there are no Israel firsters who are also unhappy about Epstein. I'm saying the people who are content that we've got what we're going to get tend to be in that camp, which is kind of odd because that only raises further suspicions. Like, why would you act like that? That just makes us wonder further. Why is it turning out this way?
No, Socrates is most certainly not a cat, but you do have this scenario where everybody who thinks that it's really important for us to bomb Iran, also is very sure that Jeffrey Epstein was 100% not a Mossad agent, and we really don't need to look into that any further. And that one's pretty hard to ignore, right? Like that, it's not a, as you say, the Venn diagram is not a circle, but we can certainly see where these things overlap quite a bit. And look, Ben Shapiro, to be fair, is a guy who told you to get the vax, right? Like, this is a guy who's towed the line on a lot of stuff, and this is not the only thing. It's not just Israel he toes the line on. He is there to sell you, I think, a mainstream opinion in most scenarios. But certainly he's not going to miss his opportunity when it relates to Israel as well. So I don't know. I would just look at the track record. Is this somebody who's been correct on a regular basis? No, not really, especially when things point in a particular direction. So am I going to, point this out? Look, I like Dan Bongino. He was, I don't know him personally, but he was very kind to me when I had no platform, and he put my articles on his website and read them on his show. And so, like, I've got nothing but goodwill for Dan Bongino. He was very much a crusader on this issue. And I'll be honest, man looks like he had, someone had taken his family hostage when he had to sit there and talk about how the Epstein stuff just didn't matter. We get these stories about how he took the day off after the Pam Bondi stuff because, there was so much conflict in the White House. So I don't know. One day we will have someone who does like fascinating criminology on the Trump White House and can pick and parse every faction and how they all come together. I don't have any inside knowledge that anyone else doesn't have. But I do think there's a fair amount of conflict, honestly, with the Trump White House and what's going on there. I don't think everybody, even inside the White House itself, the administration itself, is on board with this solution. And so it's very clear that Bondi is just not going to be able to extricate herself, I think, from many of these problems. So, yeah, I mean, they might be able to move on, but like I said, it's going to require doing some radical goodwill by, getting other things done. I don't think this is just going to get brushed under the rug if they're also failing on war and on deportation and a bunch of other promises made.
You mentioned Ben Shapiro, because I also mentioned him. The poor guy, I shouldn't say the poor guy, he deserves it, but you were mentioning examples of how he's just thoughtlessly, maybe not thoughtlessly, adopted the mainstream opinion on things. And to me, one that it might seem trivial to some people because it was a fleeting episode, but I think to the contrary, it's very revealing, was his response to the Covington Catholic High School thing with Nicholas Sandmann. And people were seeing a 30-second clip and saying, oh, he's a racist and he's not being friendly enough to that man with the drum in his face. And then, so I became the world's foremost expert on this, Auron, because I watched, we had all the footage. It was only like an hour and a half, 2 hours. So to become an expert, all you had to do was watch it. So I did. And the truth of this matter is so the opposite of what we were told. And you could say, well, he didn't have all the evidence, but that's the thing, is that his instinct is, I have a 30-second clip here, and it appears to put this white kid in a bad light. So I'm going to jump on that and act like a leftist and say, oh, well, there's so much racism in our society. It's like my first instinct was not to say that about that kid. Your first instinct was not to say that about that kid. His first instinct is to say, look, I'm one of the reasonable ones. I'm like you. When push comes to shove, I have the same concerns you have. That thought would never cross my mind.
Well, and we saw the same thing with the Shiloh Hendricks stuff, right? Again, he immediately says, oh, well, she has no justification. All of this is terrible. How could conservatives do this? And Matt Walsh comes out on the other side of that and says, no, absolutely. Like, look, I don't want her running around throwing a slur at someone, but ultimately it's good that cancel culture is losing its power, because it feels like Matt Walsh might want to win at some point. And maybe Ben Shapiro, not so much, right? Like that's not his first priority. And the interesting thing is that Matt Walsh is just a much more important personality on the Daily Wire than Ben Shapiro is at this point. Let's be honest. Who's listening to Ben Shapiro?
Yeah, I honestly don't know.
Talk radio boomers, maybe, right?
Yeah.
Like that, it used to be he was the young person. Oh, look, Ben Shapiro owns the youths. He's owning all these kids on campus. Ben Shapiro, compilations with the doobie dropping and the sunglasses. I don't know if you remember all of these.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He used to be, oh, here is like Rush Limbaugh for a younger audience. And actually, what it's become is he's more or less irrelevant to that audience, at this point. And so in a lot of ways, I don't know that he's an effective weapon very much anymore. He's still got the name recognition, right? Obviously, like in theory, he's one of the founders and flagship talent on the Daily Wire. But honestly, if Matt Walsh walked tomorrow, what would the Daily Wire's numbers look like? I don't know, right? It just feels like that's a much more sustainable position to be in. Again, Walsh isn't perfect, but obviously he's winning on that platform, and guys like Shapiro are losing ground. And it's repeatedly because Shapiro comes down on basically institutional leftist beliefs half the time.
And the thing is, I would say on the Israel subject, Matt Walsh has gone as far as he can probably go on that platform. He's gone right up to the line in what his opinions on that matter are. And so I don't know, man. I don't know anything about the internal workings of that site. They were willing to part ways with Candace Owens, who had a big audience. But I wonder at this point, now they're kind of running a little bit thin on star power. Maybe they just have to tolerate Matt Walsh for a while until it becomes unsustainable. I don't know, because you're right. I mean, if your big star is Ben Shapiro, I don't know. I guess they have Jordan Peterson. I don't know, but even he. I'll just say this and we'll wrap up because I know you have a heart out. But that thing you posted the other day, I shared it with my newsletter audience about the problem with a right-wing influencer. It's a problem of that a lot of people who strive to be one of these people have, that you're under pressure to have an opinion on everything at all times instantly, which is hard to do because, having an informed opinion involves gathering a lot of information. But you have to have an opinion that's not quite like everybody else's, because then you're dispensable. So you have to have like some out there oddball version of the opinion. And thank goodness I'm not striving to be one of these people who just has a Twitter account and that's it. It would make me absolutely crazy. So I don't know. I shifted gears here for a minute here because I just wanted to thank you for pointing that out. That before we had social media, there was no demand like this on anyone. That on a dime, you had to have an opinion on absolutely everything. This is exhausting. I don't know how anybody could do it or why they would try, but that is really, really hard. And I just like having the Tom Woods Show that does not cover every topic under the sun. And I have an email newsletter in which I write about what I feel like talking about and what I feel knowledgeable about. And I don't even try to race with these other people.
Well, and that's why I personally try to avoid having a news of the day show. Like you, I sit down, we do comment. Obviously, we're commenting on current events today, but then tomorrow we might be reading Joseph de Maistre or going into, exploring some concept, and it's a nice mixture. And you're a guy who has, a doctorate. You obviously have the credentials that could enter into the life of the mind. But how many right-wing universities, how many right-wing institutions existed for a guy like you to make to make a career in that? Now, luckily, guys like us have been able to rearrange our show formats to avoid some of that grind out. But ultimately, you shouldn't have to choose. Your only option for being a right-wing intellectual shouldn't be hosting a show somewhere. There should be an infrastructure that allows you to actually think deeply and gather things. And yes, you're still putting out work, you're still putting out content, but months or even, once a year rather than every single day grinding on this stuff, because you can't do the research, you can't read the books, you can't explore the thoughts if you're constantly having to quip, constantly have to keep up with whatever's breaking on Twitter. It's just deleterious to people. And Jordan Peterson's a guy who obviously existed in the university system for many years, and he came on the scene with this wealth of really high quality, complex understanding. But over time, there's only so many ways you can rearrange Jung, right? Like there's only so many ways you can apply that to a current news cycle. And at some point, you need to go back and recharge and think. And we just don't allow right-wing people to do that at this point.
Yeah, exactly right. I want to respect your time. Auron, is there a link? Or obviously the Auron MacIntyre show, Auron MacIntyre, MACIN on Twitter. Anything else you want to link to or promote?
Just, of course, the show's on Twitter. It's on Odyssey. It's on Spotify. It's on everything you'd expect The book, The Total State, is about to go into its second paperback printing. So if you want to grab some of those hard copies before they are replaced with the paperbacks, you can get them for a decent price on Amazon right now. So just grab The Total State if you would like to get a hard copy before you don't have that option anymore. So.
All right, Auron, thanks a million. Join me, everybody, at the Ron Paul 90th birthday party, ronpaulbbq.com, and I'll see you next time.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com, and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.